My name's Daniel Singleton. I head up FaithAction. I want to welcome you to this Faith in Partnership event. We're really pleased to have Daniel Range with us, who is an assistant professor within Coventry University's Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations. I have to look down because I can never get the centre's name right correctly, which is not good because I recently did some study with them myself. So but good to have Dan here, and I will hand over to him in a minute. Really pleased to see so many people come to this event. One of the things we're often saying to faith-based organizations is it's important to evaluate and to count and to look at the data around the work we do. We've got some good stories to tell, and we consistently hear good stories, but being able to actually present some stats and to look at what is done through proper evaluations is invaluable. And we are pleased that Dan and his colleagues were able to work with us on a number of programs over the past little while, and that's partly what we want to follow up with today. But we do have some resources, particularly around evaluation and looking at impact. So if you're a FaithAction member, you should be able to access those resources on the website. If you're not, drop us a line and we'll sort you out with that. But it's really important. One of the other equalities groups that we work alongside, we're talking about the census, and their little phrase is if you're not counted, you don't count. And I think it's an important thing to recognize that in this time, it's important to have stories. It's important to get case studies, but actually to count and to crunch that data in different ways is really important as well. Part of what we're wanting to do over this week is to examine and to give focus to how faith makes an important contribution in the life of the UK. We can make a better contribution if we can work in partnership. And one of the things that I consistently say to government officials, local government, national government, is that you saw the key way that faith organisations helped and made a difference over lockdown. Often remember that in some of the meetings I was in, the NHS were very confident about rolling out the jab, but within a very short period of time, they had to work with different agencies and particularly engage with faith to reach the people that weren't being reached with the COVID vaccination. It was absolutely vital. I think the thing that concerns me most is that since lockdown, there seems to be, again, a retreating to business as usual and not particularly looking at how we can work in partnership and embed those ways of working between faith and the public sector and independent sector generally. That there is a great opportunity, and we can deal with some of the real tough issues in life if we work together, if we're partner in that way. And certainly some of what Dan will talk about will cover some of those things. But it's my message continually: let's not just keep faith for crisis. Let's embed and work together throughout the year. Let's make sure the relationships are there so that we have got those relational and connected bridges for when there is times of particular pressure. But it's good not to live from crisis to crisis, and it's good to work together whenever we can. Anyway, enough from me. Let me hand over to Dan Range, or Dr. Dan Range. He's missed off his doctorate at the start of things there. Good to have you with us, Dan. Take us away.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. So my name is Dr. Dan Range. I'm an assistant professor at the Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry University. Daniel said he always struggles a little bit with the name there. I was at CTPSR when we moved over from being the Institute of Community Cohesion, which was probably 8 or 9 years ago now. And I specifically asked for nothing that had S's or C's in, because I've got a light lisp. So they gave us the Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations to make me struggle for the next 10 years. So my background in working with FaithAction and professionally as an evaluator goes back about 10 years. So originally working at Coventry University with ICOCO, we were asked by what was then the Department for Communities and Local Government to work with FaithAction to independently evaluate their Creative English programme. And we worked with that programme over sort of 2 years in quite a formative way to really understand how the programme works, how FaithAction work, and whether or not the programme is delivering its outputs and outcomes. That was, Creative English has gone sort of from strength to strength since then. Actually, that was our first introduction to working with FaithAction. And actually, they're fairly unique in charities that we've worked with, in as much as they're really open to critical independent evaluation and really see the value of having robust evidence collected. So we've continued this sort of working relationship, working on and off with them on a number of their projects over that time. And it was around a year ago that Daniel approached us to ask if we could look at these free programs. Doing free evaluations at the same time is quite unusual, and I'm going to sort of pass over to Jenny and other colleagues at the moment in a minute to give a background to the programs. But working with free projects at the same time is quite unusual. They're three very different projects, but actually what they have in common is that they're delivered through partnership with the faith sector, public sector and faith sector partnership. So we thought it was a really interesting way there to sort of look at how that works and what the sort of costs and benefits and pros and cons could be, as well as doing the sort of traditional evaluation. So that's kind of where we are today. I'm going to hand over to the leaders of FaithAction, sort of just discuss their projects, introduce them, and then we'll come back to my piece around what we found.
Thanks, Dan. We'll go to Jenny, and then we'll hear from Martin, and then finally Andrew. Go, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jenny. I'm just going to share my screen. I hope you can all see that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Faith Health Action Partnership. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Faith Health Action Partnership, otherwise known as FHAP. And this was a project that took place in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, and it was funded by Tower Hamlets Public Health. This was the second time that we worked with Public Health. We originally worked with them during the COVID-19 lockdowns, but with FHAP, we took a focus on health-based projects, and we worked alongside community partners East London Mosque and Tower Hamlets Interfaith Forum to fund 8 faith-based organisations to run projects with a health focus, with support from our engagement officers. And these were a mix of mosques, churches and community groups. One of the main objectives for the project was to co-produce the activities or the services with the faith settings. So we began by identifying the local health needs, and it resulted in supporting the settings to run the projects. So we've got some images of some of the projects that took place. So there was a women's cycling group, there was an activity group for older people, over 50s yoga, and blood pressure testing. And so the value of partnership working was just, incredible for this project. It was really helpful that the council were aware of the unique offer that faith settings have, having previously worked with them during COVID and before. And so a relationship was already building, and we had a good relationship with the local interfaith forum. And it was really helpful for the faith settings that the council didn't impose any number-driven targets for the settings to reach, because a lot of them are really small organisations that hadn't run this type of project before. When FHAP finished, we received similar funding to work with Black African churches. This was a Churches Health Action Partnership, and you can see a picture there of an exercise session. And if you want any further details, we've got a web page. I can put that in the chat as well. So that's FHAP, and I think I'm handing over to Andrew.
We're actually going to go to Martin now.
Right, I can unmute, bear with me, and let me just share Good. Let me just share my screen. Right, got too many things up. Sorry about this. And let's go from the beginning. Right, Creative English for Health. This was a program we delivered last year across Birmingham, funded by Public Health in Birmingham. And Creative English has been one of our programs that we've run for about 10 years in various guises, but uses drama, role play, really to help learners become more confident to speak English and learn as they go along. It uses, like we said, role play, dressing up, and all sorts of things like that. And last year we delivered Creative English for Health, where we had adapted the program to address health literacy across those that have English as a second language in and across Birmingham. So the aims really for the program was to increase the learners' awareness of health literacy. And so therefore they would have the ability to access the NHS services and to also increase their learners' confidence to engage with medical professionals whilst using English. And the way we did this, we had 10 delivery locations across Birmingham. Primarily, they were faith-based organisations. We were looking to engage a minimum of 60 learners per hub, and we used the Health Literacy Survey EU16, which is a short version of a health literacy survey that's a recognised survey before and after the programme, so that we could gauge how the impact has been on the course. And we have obviously Dan will speak shortly about the evaluation. We had a clear improvement across all 16 questions in their understanding, and that was with over 450 learners that actually completed 10 sessions or more. I don't know whether you can see that, but these are the questions that we were using for the health literacy survey. It was everything to do with how to find and access information, whether they were understanding what the doctor was saying, as to where to go and find a second opinion if required. But the overall project was a huge success. Even just over 10 sessions, there was a marked improvement, enabling people to access the NHS services across Birmingham. And that's me done. So Andrew, I believe.
This is my go now. Share my screen. Brilliant. Hopefully everyone can see that yet. So I'm going to be talking about our Cafe Connect program. Much like the Creative English program that Martin's just been speaking about, the Cafe Connect program is another part of our integration and belonging suite of projects. It is designed by Dr. Anne Smith, a member of our team, based on her PhD research. The Cafe Connect model was a model that we had been batting around as a team for a while, looking for an opportunity that would fit it best. When we found out about the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities Hong Kong British National Overseas Welcome Scheme. As many people might well know, back in January 2021, the British government launched the British National Overseas Visa, which was for people from Hong Kong who have British National Overseas status and were looking to leave Hong Kong due to the ongoing protests and the crackdown by the authorities that resulted from them. As part of this visa program, they wanted to allow the newcomers to the country to feel welcome and belong to their local communities that they were joining. And so the Welcome Programme was launched. The Welcome Programme had a range of different projects associated with it, a range of different programmes. We were part of the regional BCSE scheme. So we delivered Cafe Connect in 3 regions: London, the West Midlands, and Yorkshire and the Humber. And we delivered in 3 hubs in all 3 regions, as well as 2 online groups, 1 in Yorkshire and the Humber and 1 in the West Midlands. The main issue with the Welcome Programme was that the BNO visa is not a refugee visa. And so it was very difficult for the government to know exactly where BNOs were moving to, because they didn't have to register in any sort of way. So that was quite an interesting challenge for us as a team in trying to find areas that had incoming people from Hong Kong and people we could work with. However, as with the normal Creative English model, we partnered with local organisations, mainly churches on this occasion, because we found that churches had a pretty unique way of engaging with the Hong Kong community. They are a trusted source for people, and even people of faith were turning towards churches because they knew they were trusted and that they would get good service from them. Each hub, each voluntary organisation that we worked with put up a team of volunteers that were trained by our team in the ways of Cafe Connect, so they could deliver weekly sessions to BNOs. And each session was divided up into several different sections. So the first section was a session that the whole group took part in. So it was based typically around a story, usually around some sort of historical event or piece of culture within British culture that they would like to know about, usually based on things that would appear in the Life in the UK text, which if they would like to go for citizenship, the people from the whole BNO visa status would have to take part in eventually. And then the session would then be divided up into separate different table activities. These activities range from opportunities to practice English language, utilising some of the Creative English based programme, but some of the other tables had crafts on them. And what we found was that crafts are a really fantastic way for people to open up with each other. You focus on the craft rather than the conversation that you're having, so that you don't always have to feel uncomfortable within the group. And as people were working together on the task at hand, they'd have conversations. We'd often have volunteers on each individual table encouraging conversations. And it was a really great way for people to start to foster friendship, a relationship with not only each other, but with the host community that they're a part of. The programme also encouraged our hubs to invite in outside speakers to cover issues and concerns that the people from the programme had. In particular, we had people from the local council coming in to discuss issues around schooling and some housing issues that the BNOs were experiencing. We had the local police in some of our sessions talking about how to report hate crimes and issues around crime in general. And it was a really great way to, again, encourage the BNOs to become part of the community, to find out more about what was going on the local level. These pictures at the moment are just some of the scenes that we captured throughout the programme of how much fun and how engaged a lot of the BNOs became. It wasn't just about the BNOs, it was about the host community as well. A big part of the Cafe Connect programme is that we encourage not just the volunteers to get involved, but also general members of the host community. And so we would encourage like members of the church or members of the organisation to come along, get involved, and share their own knowledge and expertise. And it's really about kind of knowledge and sharing to help build up that sense of belonging and participation as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, let's get to Dan now. Thanks, Dan.
Give me 1 second, screen share. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for introducing the projects. As we said, there were 3 at the same time here running, and it's quite rare to have that opportunity to look at 3 very different programs together. It gives potentially a much larger data set. And large data sets are good because you've got different variables coming in, stuff you can control and stuff you can't. And it means you can really start to look at what the commonalities are, what the differences are, what's replicable and what's transferable. So what can we learn from these 3 very different projects that have the same commonality of being a public sector and faith sector partnership through delivery? So all 3 evaluations had 3 clear goals to them. The first was to check that FaithAction were delivering what they had told the funder they would deliver and what they contracted to. That's been touched upon in all 3 of the presentations, and I believe all the reports are being made available online. So I'm not going to go into too much detail around the deliverables today, but FaithAction really did achieve on all of them. You know, there were very few areas where the programs didn't perform as expected, and a lot of areas where the programs did. You know, the delivery was solid. We were aiming to capture best practice that we can learn from and can be replicated elsewhere in similar projects by FaithAction and others. So we developed case studies where we could, and we've documented and detailed those to be made publicly available. Again, that goes back to what I feel is FaithAction's very open attitude to evidence and data collection and sharing with others. But the one we're focusing on today is this understanding of the role of the faith sector in delivery. So this is looking at what benefits there were or what costs there were to the public sector and faith sector partnership in delivering these ways. We took a mixed methods approach to this. So we wanted a mixture of quantitative data, which is where we go out and we speak to people running the program, we speak to people who are leading the hubs, we speak to the participants, we observe what goes on in the sessions and in the hubs, and alongside the quantitative data, which is the program data around what's been achieved. Martin showed the outcomes from the health literacy survey. Jenny's project FHAP had stuff around trust in local government, and Andrew introduced Cafe Connect, which had outcomes around cohesion. So we looked at all of those together, taking that mixed methods approach, and we also took what's called an inductive approach. So we came into it, and FaithAction were again very open to doing this, in not assuming that we knew what the answers would be or what we would find. So inductive is where you start gathering the data and you analyze as you go, and you start to look for patterns in the data. You start to look for emergent themes and things that are coming out of it. And with relation to this understanding the role of faith sector in delivery, we had 4 themes emerge that we kept following up on and collecting more data on to see if they bottomed out or if they actually showed us anything. I'm going to go through those 4 one by one shortly. It's also worth stating here that the research was conducted to academic standards. So I need ethical approval from Coventry University before undertaking research to ensure that we're collecting data correctly and that participants will come to no harm. But prior to these projects starting, FaithAction set up their own independent academic advisory board, which also we had to run our methods past beforehand to ensure that the independent academic advisory board were comfortable with how we were collecting data, what we were aiming to show, and it would be robust enough to draw some conclusions from. Okay, so as we know, all 3 projects were really, really different and had very different approaches and crucially different cohorts. So the cohort that Jenny was working with in Tower Hamlets was very different to the cohort that Andrew had been working with in the 3 regions for Cafe Connect, and similarly Birmingham was very distinct, probably had more in common with Tower Hamlets than the other 3 regions, but we're looking at working with different people in different places with different needs. But by putting all the data together and having this one larger data set and looking at the role of the faith sector in delivery, there were 4 things which came out really strongly and consistently across all three projects. And they were that trust was important, locality was important, that the faith sector helped to add reach to the projects, and that there were some real benefits to sustainability. So all of these are really closely linked to one another and they overlap. I'm going to start with trust because that underpins a lot of the work and is the most logical place to start. I think I've got about another 15 minutes to be presenting here. Then we're going to take questions at the end, if that's okay. It's quite a large group. So it's worth introducing trust as an academic and social psychological concept to start with, because trust is a word that we all use and all have an understanding of in our day-to-day lives. It's actually defined in the sense we're using here as one party having positive expectations of the other and being willing to make themselves vulnerable to the actions of others or another party. Now, this can be split down into three different ways that trust is built. It's built through the individual's perceptions of the ability of another individual or organization to do what they say they will do. So if you're going to a Cafe Connect session to learn more about life in Wolverhampton, do the participants believe that can be delivered? Benevolence, which is the participants' perception of the organisation or individuals' positive intentions towards them. Does the organisation running this want the best for them? And integrity. So do the participants believe that they are being told the truth by the organisation or individual they're working with? So those three are the determinants of trust, and that's a definition. Trust is then further split down into what we'd call interpersonal trust, which is our relationship with another individual. So I trust Jenny because I've worked with her for many years. I trust Andrew because I've worked with him for many years. They are people. An organisation would be FaithAction. I trust FaithAction, again, because of my previous experience with them. And that's kind of where the split was. And people here, participants in all three programmes, really drew value from the faith sector involvement because they felt a high level of trust. So talking about interpersonal, what came up a lot was that people were willing to engage with a programme they may not previously have engaged with, or something that they may not have gone out their way to do before, even if they needed it, because of the people running it. So the quote here, we come here because we know the people. If this person says it would be a good thing for me, then I'll believe him and try it. And that's drawn from the FHAP programme, but is a fairly typical quote from across all three. And the referent of trust here, the person being trusted, it may be the person involved at a faith institution or place of worship. So it may be the imam or the priest, or it may be a volunteer there, or it may be a friend or family member who uses that faith space as well. But that was a really important hook for people to get their trust in there. Similarly, organisational trust was really strong. This quote here, we can reach people that statutory can't because we've been here since 1984 and we're trusted. That's one. And also that they, as in the mosques, are often more trusted than government institutions. Really, they're an interlocutor here and the trust is massive. So people live in often quite tightly defined areas and they know their local providers, they know their local faith spaces, they know the institutions, and in many cases, some of the institutions have been there for longer than the people have. And they trust them. They've seen consistent. If we go back to the ability, benevolence, integrity, they've got many examples from across their life. If you look at the 1984 one there, that's nearly 40 years. They can draw on 40 years of examples of that institution serving their local community. And because of that, they trust it and they're willing to engage with it. A step on from that, once people are in the spaces, is that this level of trust helps to create safe spaces. I'm going to talk about the shared values of the faith sector later, or people's perceptions of shared values. But one of the things that came up, particularly in the creative English for health work and the FHAP work, was that people were willing to have conversations in faith spaces with people that they would not have outside outside these spaces. So working at a mosque in Tower Hamlets, I attended a health session for men in their 50s and 60s, talking about sort of high blood pressure and diabetes and other health outcomes that come from sort of lifestyle choices. And there was conversations there that went quickly on to mental health and discussions of loneliness and isolation that came around because of COVID lockdowns and subsequent restrictions. And that wasn't a way that I had predicted the conversation would go. And I asked the gentleman there if they had these discussions anywhere else, and they don't. Would they have these discussions with the same people but in a different context? If they bumped into one another in a cafe, would they have the conversation? Would they have the conversation in the street? Would they have the same conversation at a hospital or GP surgery, even with the same cohort of people? And the answer there was a resounding no. These men were willing to have the discussion they had there and to open up because they trusted that what they said to one another in the mosque wouldn't leave the mosque. And that they knew that was a space to have that conversation. And we saw the same in Birmingham at the Creative English course, where women from different religious backgrounds were very happy to have conversations around women's health, and particularly the menopause, that they felt they couldn't have with other people elsewhere, but were happy to do it in that safe space that they felt they could trust, where they could make themselves vulnerable to other people because it was protected by the values of that building and that institution. That's really powerful. And I think that needs emphasis, but also what needs emphasis is that the faith sector was often, directly after people say that, was compared really favourably against the statutory sector here too. Typical quote was that I don't know my GP, if I get an appointment, it's never the same person. Who are they? They don't know me. So that person was not willing to sort of have these sort of levels of discussions with someone they've not met before, someone they're unlikely to meet again, someone they don't feel that they could trust. So to get these really detailed, important conversations around health outcomes, you needed to have people in safe spaces where they felt comfortable with the people they were with and the organisation they were with. And people felt that in faith sector environments in a way they did not in traditional public health environments. Jumping on to locality, which is obviously linked to trust. We saw the example there of the building that's been open since 1984. That's local to people. These projects largely ran in deprived areas. The index of multiple deprivation is used across the UK to calculate deprivation and to sort of rank local areas on levels of deprivation. All of these areas were pretty much in the top quartile of the country for deprivation. And one of the ways that the IMD is calculated is by looking at barriers to housing and services. And this was recurrent here, that people felt they couldn't access services. Part of this, services exist in major cities, but if you've got travel costs, childcare, the time spent traveling, and you live in a spatially segregated area, often you're not willing to travel into a city centre or outside your own area or comfort zone to access services. So people opt out. But these faith buildings, which the free programs were running, or these community venues which the programs ran in, were generally sort of hyper local to the communities. They were in the communities that the project served, and people typically had fairly short times of travel to get to them. This meant that that people were in their comfort zone traveling, that it took them less time, and they could often walk, which mitigated travel costs. So people were more willing to go to something which is very local, and faith is in every local area in the country. There are different faith groups operating in different areas, but there is always a faith centre somewhere. There's not always a hospital or a GP surgery or council building everywhere for everyone that can be accessed. And this also meant that delivery could be tailored as it went. So going back to sort of our inductive approach here, FaithAction also took quite a what we call inductive approach in they had an idea of what the project should deliver and what people would need, but actually as they were working locally in very different areas, those assumptions were challenged and local need and context was able to come to the fore. I mean, it's quite often the case that as professionals working in communities, we can assume that we know. If you're a health expert, you know about public health. If I'm an expert on integration and cohesion, I know about integration and cohesion. I don't actually know what living in certain areas of Birmingham is like. I don't know a great deal about what living in Yorkshire and Humber is like. We need to listen to local people and let their context come to the fore. And actually, by delivering locally, the programs were able to do that. Reach was the third group of findings which came up, and I always like to challenge the word hard to reach group, because I think when people say a group is hard to reach, I think it's probably just a sign that you're trying to engage with them in the wrong way. And hard to reach shouldn't be a blanket statement. You know, it's okay for a public health body to say, oh, it's hard to reach Muslim men in their 50s and 60s. But yeah, it might be for a public health body, but actually, if you go to the local mosque, there's lots of Muslim men in their 50s and 60s who you can reach. If it's difficult to reach young mothers from the BNO community, then there are places to do that. You know, there isn't a blanket statement, and you need to change how you're approaching engagement with people. Traditional methods through statutory bodies don't work for everyone, and you know, the hard to reach groups shouldn't be banded around in that way. What we did find, though, was that many participants only regularly engage anywhere at a place of worship. You know, for a lot of people in these areas, they have childcare issues, they work. Their place of worship is the only place outside the home or the work that they engage publicly. So if you want to engage with these people, you need to go through the route that they are already using. There aren't other options here. This isn't a group of people who have lots of hobbies and lots of free time and lots of money elsewhere. A lot of people, particularly where English language proficiency isn't great, aren't engaging through other statutory bodies either. So this is the route to engage with people through their place of worship. To engage in here broadens reach very, very quickly as well, because once you engage well and build trust with a group of people, that opens up wider networks through their friends and families. So this interpersonal trust and system of referral happens. So if you can gain trust of a small cohort and work with them, then you know that their relatives and friends are more likely to access your services because they've been recommended by someone that they know. And we saw that snowballing effect take place in all three programs. That was a consistent finding. Part of the reasons for this reach, the benefits of reach through faith sector engagement, there were three which really helped to remove barriers. They were that people had a cultural comfort around being in these places. They knew what to expect when they went into the environment. They had much less social anxiety or social embarrassment than they would have walking into a kind of a professional venue. They knew what to expect and how they'd be greeted and how they'd be treated. And they were treated they expected to be treated in a way which was culturally relevant to them. They weren't given an alien treatment. Part of this links to the values of the faith sector. And you know, this is something which I found in sort of 10 years of working with FaithAction. And something that I questioned originally working with Creative English was you were running English language sessions for mainly Muslim women out of mosques, out of churches in East London. And I sort of questioned why they weren't being run out of Muslim places of worship. Actually, speaking to the participants there, they were happy to attend in a church or a Christian space because of the perception of shared values between the faith groups. So where they may not attend in a further education centre or may not be comfortable in a secular building, they were comfortable walking into a place of worship or faith space, even if it was different from their own faith background, because of that assumption of shared values. And lastly, translation was something that came up in helping with reach. So if you're running in places of worship where people from the same faith and ethnic background come together to worship and spend time, that means there's often a lot of informal translation available. So people are able and comfortable to come in because if they have a need, they're confident there'll be someone there who speaks their language and can help them. And that was speaking to people who had this through translators. That was something they don't feel if they go to a hospital or a GP or to a local council, because they're not confident, particularly if they're not one of the major other languages. They feel that there will be issues around translation, and it's an extra barrier for them. I've just got a couple of quotes here that kind of emphasize some of the findings, particularly one around values. So we're mainly Christian here, but it's not really a faith-based service. I think the relationship is the biggest part. They know that we care and we have their best interests at heart because we're Christian, but also it's because we're well known and we're safe. So that links well to the trust stuff. People trust the venues and willing to engage because of this idea of shared values and because they're known in their local area. And a kind of flip side to that is a person who run a hub on one of the programs saying the council couldn't run these because they don't have grassroots contacts, local expertise, or the capability to connect with people. That isn't what they do. They're a bureaucracy. They do want to do good, but they aren't best placed to do it directly. So that isn't even a dig at local authorities or the public sector. That's just saying you're good at doing some things and we're good at doing other things. And that's really what partnership should be about. It's about specialization. I'm good at some things. Andrew is good at other things. We should work together. Myself and Jenny work really closely on the Tower Hamlets Interfaith Forum. I know we've got people from there here. I'm good at some aspects of it. Jenny is fantastic at other bits and keeps the whole thing running from our end because of how she does it. That's what partnership is. And that's what the participants here are saying. Councils, public health bodies are good at some things. What they're not good at doing is the grassroots stuff. And that's what specialism is. That's why partnership is important. And that's where real value gets added. And the last one here is discussing sustainability. Primarily, I'm going to focus here on sustainability of engagement rather than treading the line of financial sustainability again, because we all know about funding, but I'll reiterate that at the end, but primarily around sustainability of engagement. So what we found a lot of was that people become engaged in these programs for the first time because they have a need that is met. So they want to learn English, or they want to learn more, in the case of Cafe Connect, about their local area, the local history and the local culture. Or in the case of FHAP, they want their blood pressure read, or they're concerned about a particular health inequality. And they engage for the first time based on that. But actually then they're engaged much longer. There's other programs, other services, and they're often retained. So you speak to someone who came in for one reason and they're now there for another reason. They continued beyond the program and they plan to. Being involved in these community projects and faith projects is now part of what they do, part of their lives. They've got friends and networks there. We found in all three programs clear paths of people becoming volunteers. Participants join as a participant and they become formally or informally become a volunteer. And then we found that volunteers can leverage that experience as a volunteer. So they've got something to go on their CV, they've got new skills, and really importantly, they've got much more confidence and they start moving towards employment. And that gives more back to the sector and more people follow that pathway. We already mentioned that participants refer one another. So you get the snowballing effect, get people engaged, and they know 3 or 4 people who get people engaged, and they know 3 or 4 people who get people engaged. That people referring one another into the program. What also works really well is signposting. So once you have people engaged, you can then signpost them to other statutory things that they need. So people come in example of creative English for health. There may be young children with sort of asthma and breathing difficulties. their parents come in to find out more about that. They access health services, but then they're signposted on to the local authority about housing and there's damp issues. And this can start off a chain of referrals and internal and signposting between statutory bodies. Once you get people in the system, you can start to address their more complex interlinked needs. And again, the sustainability links back to locality. If you're doing stuff that's local, it's easy for people to access and easy for people to carry on accessing. Last of all here is the bit around funding. These programs will all be more sustainable in the long term if the engagement is kept going. Sunk costs are normally portrayed quite negatively. Sunk costs are costs you've incurred that you can't get back. And people often perceive sunk costs to be a bad thing. The sunk costs here, these programs have delivered. There have been sunk costs in engaging with people and getting people into these kind of programs for the first time. Actually dropping these programs after a year or 18 months runs the risk of losing those people. Some will be retained, some will become volunteers and become employed. But if you stop the work, you then may lose some of the people. And then if another program starts in 18 months, you've got to go through the cost and effort and time of recruiting again, which often leads to stop-start projects. If you keep work going over the longer term, you keep the engagement going, it's much more efficient to have one funding cycle for a longer time than it is to have 5 or 6 over shorter periods. Let's go through a few challenges and then move on to conclusion and recommendations so we can wrap up and take some questions. I'll be quick on these because I'm conscious of time and I do want to take some questions. So this is not a win-win-win on everything. You know, you can't solve every problem through working in partnership between public sector and the faith sector. It's definitely a benefit. It's definitely something you should be doing. But for both parties, there can be reputational issues. So some places of worship and some community venues may not want to be seen to be working with public bodies. And similarly, public bodies may not want to be seen to be working too closely with some places of worship. There's a consistency of delivery issue. So having a body like FaithAction involved where they act as a kind of broker between the public bodies and the grassroots means that there's some project management, which means you can expect a consistency of delivery and you mitigate a lot of those risks. Cutting that out and jumping from one to the other runs a risk of not having the background, not having the checks on can people, can institutions deliver. Reach, we discussed the positives of reach, but there are also people who don't and won't access faith venues. So you're not going to access everyone in the world by using faith venues. You need to have a look at who may be excluded. So that could be groups from different gender backgrounds, people of different sexualities, and in some cases, people with disabilities as well because of access to venues. Last one here is attribution as well. So we found it particularly with the FHAP project where we was looking at trust in public institutions. Participants knew what FHAP was. They knew that it was running through their local place of worship, and they had increased perceptions of benevolence and ability towards their place of worship. They knew FaithAction were the umbrella organisation which was administering the project, and they grew their positive perceptions towards FaithAction. Not many drew the line further back to public health Tower Hamlets because of issues around visibility and branding now. So you can only be attributed success if participants know you're involved. Jumping on to conclusion and recommendations, and promise this is the last slide. This is a model that works. You know, all 3 of the evaluations are going to be made available online. I'll leave my email address as well if anyone wants to get in contact with me to discuss any more detailed findings. But this is a model that works, and faith-based action makes a clear difference. The test of any good theory or model is that it's scalable, transferable, replicable. I see no reason why having this type of partnership working in public projects cannot be scalable, transferable, and replicable based on these findings. and 4 quick recommendations, and then a personal opinion at the end. That local authorities do involve the faith sector in consultations and local delivery. That statutory bodies be overt in their involvement and preferably present too. That is the bit around attribution. And if a friend of a friend is my friend, if Tower Hamlets Council are a friend of the East London Mosque, then people who go to the East London Mosque will be friends of Tower Hamlets Council by virtue of that. Build that for attribution. Evidence needs to be collected and evaluation does need to take place. Most evaluations are a short snapshot in time. The more longitudinal data you have, to be able to draw out these longer term stories and pictures of change is better. Need to make sure that evidence collection is taking place. Reiterating the point around long-term funding being more sustainable and be more efficient. I think we fall into a loop of grabbing whatever short-term pots we can, but actually longer-term thinking from public bodies will be more efficient and beneficial in the long run. And lastly, before I start coughing too much, my sort of bit I want to emphasize here is that the faith sector should be treated as a partner in delivery here. They have a specialism to bring. Public sector bodies have a specialism. The faith sector has a specialism. They should be partners and not just a servant or an agent of the projects. Brilliant, thank you. I'll stop sharing now, and I think we're going to Daniel or Matt to take some questions.
Thank you. I think Matt's going to join me as well, just to deal with some questions that we'll roll on, folks, at just an extra 5 minutes or so, because obviously we gave people a bit of time to come in, and Dan's had a mammoth task to try and deliver these 3 topics. I think Matt's going to kick off with a couple of questions, and then if people want to put their hands up, we'll try to get in as many people as possible. Obviously, if you don't get in, then do fire us an email, and we'll seek to deal with that. But Matt, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, and thank you, Dan, for that presentation. I've got a whole bunch of questions I could follow up with, but I'll keep it to one for the sake of time. And then it would be great if, while I put that question to Dan, if people could begin raising their hands or putting your questions in the chat, we'll hopefully be able to get to 1 or 2 more and maybe follow up with some others afterwards. So Dan, you kind of got to this a bit at the end, but I was thinking throughout about the question of trust, because obviously that's fundamental to, it's one of the unique benefits of partnering with faith groups, and you made that point really clearly. I'm wondering also if, in terms of impact measurement, how easy or challenging it is to measure like an increase in trust as a result of a project, maybe particularly from the perspective of, we've got lots of statutory representatives here. From their perspective, how could you go about a project in a way where you're able to both realize and measure an increase in trust towards the statutory body who is commissioning the work?
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. That's a really good question. It's a really challenging one. So measuring trust is generally difficult. Measuring trust in this context is doubly so. And there's to start with, there are measures of trust. If you go to the FHAP report, the project there uses recognized indicators which show trust in public institutions. So you can use those, and you can use those questions, and they're publicly available, to kind of baseline your own findings. So having something which is comparable to a bigger picture is really important. And you can start to collect data there to find some outcomes. But actually, what you also really need to make sure you're doing in measuring trust is that the participants understand what you're measuring trust in. So if you're talking about public health, say public health Tower Hamlets, do the participants understand what the difference between public health Tower Hamlets and the NHS is? One thing which happened recurringly there was people felt a level of trust in the council because they personally trust the mayor, and then they attributed the council and the NHS to be in the same party. So you need to, I think this is where you need to have a real mix of quants and qual to know what the data is showing. You can have your headline figures drawn from proper controlled data collection using attributed scales, but you also need to understand why people are answering how they are, so you can triangulate and sense check. So you need a bit of both. You need to understand what your participants think they're measuring and think they're talking about.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Dan. And I see Reynolds posted a comment here about the Faith Covenant. Perhaps we can post a link to that for anyone who isn't aware of it. But the Faith Covenant is something that, as part of our work with the APPG on Faith and Society, has been established as a kind of a tool to be able to get over some of the barriers around mistrust, to help facilitate partnership working between local authorities and their faith groups. So do have a look into that. I would talk about it more, but I see we're at time now. Would anyone else like to raise a hand, and we can maybe get one more question in? Any burning question before we bring it to a close?
Quite a few comments throughout just on the various thing of trust being picked up. So we'll look to see if we can mine the chat a little bit and pass those on to people. Thank you for your participation.
I would recommend on the theme of trust then, if people are particularly interested, to have a read of the FHAP report, because that's got a specific section around trust that covers quite a lot. And like I say, I'll put my email address in the chat so people can contact me directly if they need to.
Excellent. Good.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you hanging on, and that's been a lot of stuff to take in. We will we'll pass on obviously the links, that kind of thing, as things come up and as these papers are published. We've obviously got other events coming up, particularly on Thursday. We've got Professor Jim McManus and Sir Stephen Timms going to be talking about the future of faith within the UK, with some other guests coming in as well to talk about more work on the ground. You'll be very welcome to tap into those things. And if some of you of the precious few who are invited to the Covenant launch of West Midlands in Walsall, we're looking forward to seeing you there. It's not apologies, it's not an open event, it's a limited space there, but if I know some people will be there, so looking forward to seeing you there in person, and we will pass on some information on that. That will be the 26th local authority to sign. I think that Walsall will be signing as well, and maybe Dudley, so that'll push us up to 27, 28 by the end of the week. So looking forward to see what happens there. Thank you for joining us.